the rhythmic styles of flamenco dance has developed its own unique musical attributes and styles. This genre can be performed with or without dancers, whether there are performers dancing along or the audience is suppressing the urge to join in. This style of Spanish music is primarily a dance style. Juan Serrano's Bella Mar is a great example that shows the way in which music interacts with, as well as reflects, the dancers, whether present or not. Juan Serrano wrote this piece while he was living in California. Though this is a fairly recent work of music, published in 1991, it is considered by many serious guitarists to be a flamenco classic. Little is known about why Juan Serrano wrote this piece, though it is very possible that it was written for his students so they could experience many of the different technical aspects and traits of flamenco guitar. The title Bella Mar translates to Beautiful Earth. This piece is a reflection of how Juan Serrano views the world. In bars 1 through 13, Serrano uses a repeated melodic phrase to begin this piece. Bella Mar has a very interesting first chord. Beginning with a D minor 6 causes the piece to have a sense of pull right from the beginning. In this section, the use of syncopation is very clear and easy to hear within the first 3 notes. The syncopation gives the piece a very distinct sense of movement immediately from the beginning. This section is relatively slow in comparison to the others, using longer note values that can give the music a stop-and-go feel. The first rasgueo is in bar 7, where the guitarist plays 5 consecutive quick strums intended to mirror the castanets of the dancer. A rasgueo is played by strumming the strings independently with the different fingers of the right hand. This can give off an almost machine gun-like effect. After the rasgueos in bars 5 and 6, an alternate melody is repeated, followed by another group of rasgueos. In bar 13, Serrano has his first large string of 16th notes, covering 2½ measures. By beginning this run on a G sharp in measure 13, Serrano clearly sets up his next key, moving from the key of A minor to E major. As the run descends all the way down the range of the guitar, it lands on a low E on beat 1 of bar 16. The guitarist immediately begins the main theme of the piece, which consists of multiple fast rasgueos. The rhythm for this section is very important. Each measure has a strong downward strum on beat 1. Many performers, including recordings of Juan Serrano, will add a quick tap of the wood of the guitar on the first beat of each measure. This tap is called a golpe. It is used to imitate a dancing technique of the same name, where the dancer stomps a foot down to add a percussive sound to the music. After the golpe, another rasgueo of 5 begins on the and of 1 and ends at the beginning of beat 2. A second rasgueo then comes in on the and of 2 until the beginning of beat 3. Each measure ends with a quick up strum on the and of beat 3. This rhythm repeats 3 times on an E major chord, then twice on an F major chord. Some musicians have changed the F major into an F major 7 sharp 11 chord, instead to leave a few strings open. Though this piece Bella Mar has never been notated in this way, it is very common practice for flamenco guitar. After the F chord, or F major 7 sharp 11, we get to another interesting measure, where the guitar arpeggiates a G major chord, a G flat major chord, and an F major chord descending quickly in order to return again to the E chord to repeat the main rhythm. In this section, Serrano uses more syncopation as well as some very interesting chords. Beginning in bar 24, the guitarist plays an A major chord, followed by a quick syncopated melody, then for the first time in the piece plays a short triplet run on the lower strings. This main strumming pattern is then repeated on an A major chord. After the rasgueo pattern plays twice, an A minor chord is then played, followed by a similar, though minor, melody to the previous section. After this section, the main rasgueo pattern is then repeated twice on an E major chord. The melody then returns to an A major chord in the same way. This time, however, the melody is different from the previous two. In this section, Serrano writes in 4 quarter note chords. This is interesting because the guitar is playing 2 diminished chords in a row. The section is followed by the main rasgueo pattern over an A major chord. The following phrase once again returns to an A minor chord, and also drastically changes the previous melody by adding a very quick run and ending on an E7 chord, which then repeats the familiar rasgueo pattern. After this E7 chord, we have our final phrase of the section. The guitarist returns to an A major chord, then goes directly into a very interesting run. This run goes from a high C sharp down to a low A. Serrano also writes into his score how he would like this run played. The numbers located above a note indicate which finger should be playing said note. Serrano asks that the E at the end of measure 80 be played on an open string. This open string gives the performer enough time to move his or her hand down the neck of the guitar to the next needed position. This open string can also give a very unique and sought-after sound to the run. After the run, the performer once again repeats the main strumming pattern of the piece over an A major chord. At this point in Bellemare, the first musical idea is repeated, this time, however, with a long scale-like run during the second half of the first phrase. This run helps the audience to understand the sense of development, even though there is a return to the previous idea. Like with the beginning of the piece, this section consists of isolated rasgueos, still in groups of 5, however not strummed like the main pattern seen before. After this first run, the section is exactly the same as the first 23 bars of the piece, including the different runs, as well as the quick strumming rasgueo pattern that will make up the main theme of this piece. Similarly to how the first and third sections are the same, so are the second and fourth. They have a very rhythmically similar idea, though are in different keys. After the repeat of the main pattern at the end of section 3, a G7 chord is played, similar to the A chord from section 2. After this chord, there is a short melodic line, followed by a run that leads into a C chord for a run of the main rasgueo pattern. After this section, Serrano changes quickly to the key of F major. This is done by emphasizing a B flat in the melody, followed by part of an F major scale, sol to do. The main strumming pattern is then repeated on an F major chord. The G7 is then repeated, along with the melody, run, and change to a C major. After the C chord rasgueo pattern again, the guitarist plays the same melody that modulated the previous phrase into the key of F, but instead of playing a B flat, the melody returns to C. A quick run is then played with the melody ending on a B natural. This is followed by the main strumming pattern played on a G7 chord. Beat 1 of bar 76 is then a G major chord, followed by another short melodic idea. This idea then returns the melody to a C for the next chord. After the C chord is played on the usual pattern, the performer plays an octave of a G on beat 1 of bar 80. The rest of the measure is used to arpeggiate and fill out a C chord. Following this section, a 31-note run is used to return to the key of E. This is the first half of the B section of Bellemare. This section is used to contrast the quick strum melody. This section is primarily composed of arpeggios, E major and A minor, with occasional quick single strums behind a short melody, like in bars 86 and 90. This section has a slower feel to it and allows the performer to be much more musical. This section allows the musician to use dynamics that were not available to them in the earlier parts of this piece. At bar 91, the arpeggios move down to the lower chords. This section begins with a short tremolo. When a note is repeated several times very quickly, it is called a tremolo. Tremolos come from the Italian word tremolando, which means to tremble. This first 3 bars of this section began with a tremolo followed by 4 8 notes that serve as a main melody of the section. The section is then followed by another arpeggio of an E7 chord that ends in a short 12-note run. This run is used to return the melody down to the lower E chord. where another arpeggio occurs. There is one more tremolo at the beginning of bar 104. This tremolo leads once again into an arpeggiated E7 chord. After this section, we have the second longest run in this piece. This run consists of 40 notes and spans 3 octaves. Similar to earlier runs, Serrano utilizes the open strings of the guitar in order to change hand positions as well as create some very interesting and unique sounds. This run is used to connect the B section of the song back to the A section. After this run, the guitar repeats the main rasgueo pattern theme once through. In bar 117, Serrano begins a new pattern. Similar to how the phrases functioned previously, each phrase begins with a strong beat 1, either a loud open string or a full chord, after which is a sort of syncopated melody that leads into a run. After each of these runs, the main rasgueo strumming pattern is repeated twice. Each phrase uses a different chord and scale, moving from a C major to F major, back to C major, followed by a G dominant 7, then returning again at the end of this section to a C major. This section is very similar to the previous one, and could easily be seen as the final phrase of the earlier section. However, in this small section lies the climax of the piece. This phrase begins with a C chord on beat 1 of bar 137. It is then followed by a C major scale, starting on the B below middle C, moving up an octave to the next C, and then moving back down all the way to a low E. After this section, a quick melodic idea is introduced. The next 5 phrases consist of variations of the same idea. They begin with a similar melody, then follow a single rasgueo, still in a group of 5. Following the final rasgueo is the climax of Bella Mar. On beat 2 of bar 144, the guitar plays a 43-note run. This is the longest run in the piece and is very clearly the climax. The piece Bella Mar ends by repeating the main theme once again. This time, however, instead of the arpeggiated G major, G flat major, and F major chords, Serrano decides that full chords strummed in 8th notes would be a better ending. The final of Bella Mar is the E major chord, strummed the same way as the previous 3 chords, followed by an 8th-note rest. The guitarist plays the D minor 6th chord, the same chord that the piece began on, before resolving to the E. The added syncopation at the end gives the final chord a very strong and final feel.